My hands are shaking as I stare at the bank statement on my laptop screen. December 14th, 11:47 p.m. The judge's ruling is 3 days away. The document in front of me is simple, just rows of numbers in a spreadsheet. But these numbers are a confession. They're a map of betrayal, and they're about to destroy everything my brother has built. I hear the notification on my phone, a text from Mom. She still doesn't know. She's been wondering why I never came to see her anymore, why I stopped calling, why her own daughter turned into a ghost in her life. But I'm not a ghost. I've been here the whole time, watching, listening, documenting. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and for the last 18 months, I've been quietly collecting the evidence that will expose the most calculated theft in my family's history. The coffee in front of me is cold. I haven't touched it in an hour. My apartment is completely dark except for the glow of the screen. This is where I've spent most nights, here, in the silence, going through financial records, comparing timestamps, matching signatures, understanding the full scope of what he did. His name is David. He's my older brother. And he didn't just steal from our mother. He stole her peace of mind. He stole her trust in her own daughter. And he did it so carefully, so methodically, that for almost 2 years our mother believed that I, her youngest, her only daughter, had abandoned her in her time of greatest need. $340,000. That's what's missing from her savings account. And David was the only one with access. Let me take you back to when everything was different. 2 years ago, I was living a life I'd built from nothing. I'm 32 years old. I work as a financial analyst for a mid-sized firm in the city. I earned my degree from university, put myself through night school, and fought hard for every promotion. I'm not someone who takes shortcuts. I'm not someone who asks for handouts. But I loved my mother. That was never complicated. Mom was a second-grade teacher for 43 years. She had a smile that could soften anyone. She taught kids how to read, helped parents navigate school conflicts, stayed late to tutor kids whose home lives were fractured. She was the kind of person who worked because she believed the work mattered. When she retired at 68, my father had already been gone for 4 years. Cancer. It was fast and brutal and left us all gasping. My father's life insurance policy, combined with Mom's modest pension and her savings over 4 decades of responsible financial planning, left her with approximately $420,000. It wasn't a fortune, but it was security. It was her ability to maintain her home, to travel occasionally, to help her grandchildren with their education, to live with dignity and independence. That money represented her entire adult life. Every dollar she didn't spend on herself, every choice she made to invest instead of indulge. It was her freedom. David was 35 when Dad died. He had a wife and 2 kids. He worked in commercial real estate, or at least that's what he told people. In reality, his job was unstable. The money came and went. There were stretches where he couldn't find work, and my mother, being my mother, would quietly help him. A check here, a bailout there, nothing massive, just enough to help him get back on his feet. I watched her do it, and I said nothing because that's what families do. That's what mothers do. But I was paying attention. I remember one dinner in early October, about 3.5 years ago. Mom, David, his wife Catherine, their 2 kids, my husband Marcus, and me. We were gathered around her kitchen table, the one she'd had since I was 12 years old. The table that had seen homework assignments and birthday cakes and arguments about politics. David mentioned something about an investment opportunity, a development project in the suburbs. If he could get capital together, he said, he could be in on the ground floor of something big. The kind of thing that would set him up for the next decade. My mother's face did something I recognized immediately. It softened in that particular way it did when she was considering helping him. I excused myself to get water. My mother followed me into the kitchen. "You don't think it's a good idea," she said, not a question. I was careful with my words. "I think you've worked hard for your security, Mom, and I think David is your son, so you're always going to want to help him. but I also think you should be very careful about lending money to family." She smiled at me, that sad, generous smile. "I'm not going to help him with money from the retirement fund if that's what you're worried about. I'm just thinking about it, gathering information." I never pushed harder than that. That was my mistake. Not the first one, but it was the first one that truly mattered. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon in March. I was at work, sitting at my desk, reviewing a client's portfolio when my phone buzzed. Mom. It was unusual for her to call during my work hours. We had a rhythm. She'd text. I'd call her back when I had time, usually in the evenings. I took the call immediately. "Honey," she said, and her voice was wrong. It was thin, frightened. "Mom, what's wrong?" "I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth." My stomach dropped. I stood up from my desk and walked to the break room for privacy. "Of course, what is it?" "Have you been angry with me? About something specific?" "No, Mom, not at all. Why?" There was a long silence. I could hear her breathing, could hear the television in the background, could feel her gathering her words. "David came by today. He was very upset. He said that you've been cruel to him over the past few months, that you've made comments to him about his finances, about his life choices, that you've made him feel like you don't respect him." I closed my eyes. "Mom, that's not..." "Let me finish. He also said that it hurt him deeply because you haven't called me in weeks, that you've been distant from the family, that you seem angry all the time now." "I called you 2 weeks ago," I said carefully. "We talked for 20 minutes. "I know, sweetheart, I know. But he said it's been longer than that since you've really made an effort. He said you've been pulling away." I wanted to tell her this was nonsense, that David was manipulating her, that I called her consistently, that I had lunch with her nearly every Sunday, that I had texted her 3 days ago with photos from a work conference. But something in her voice, something hesitant and questioning, made me understand that David had already planted seeds of doubt so carefully that anything I said would sound like defensive justification. "Mom, I don't know why David would say these things, but I want you to know that I love you, that I'm not angry at you, that I think he might be upset about something else and projecting it onto me." "Why would he do that?" "I don't know, but I think you should ask him directly what's really bothering him." She never did. Instead, what happened over the following weeks was a slow, deliberate freezing out. My calls went to voicemail more often. The Sunday lunches were canceled due to David's family events. The texts went unanswered for hours, then days. When I did connect with her, she was cordial but distant, like I was a distant relative instead of her daughter. My husband Marcus noticed it first. "She's pulling away from you," he said one evening in late April. We were lying in bed. "Have you two fought?" "No, at least I don't think so. David told her I was being distant and cruel, and now she believes it." "That's insane. You talk to your mom all the time." "I know, but I said something to David about his spending a few months ago. Nothing cruel, just an observation, and he's apparently decided to punish me for it." Marcus rolled over and looked at me in the darkness. "That's psychological manipulation." "I know what it is. I don't know what to do about it." I decided to give her space. I thought that eventually she'd see that I hadn't actually done anything wrong, that my consistency would prove my innocence. That was my second mistake. In May, David called me directly. "Mom's financial advisor mentioned something to me," he said. He was using his friendly voice, the one he uses when he's about to ask for something. "She's thinking about making some financial moves, and I want to make sure we're all on board with it." "What kind of moves?" "Like shifting some assets around, possibly doing some estate planning." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Why are you calling me about that? That's between her and her attorney." "I know, but Catherine and I are worried about her. She seems depressed since Dad's been gone. We think maybe some of that has to do with financial anxiety. We're looking into ways to help ease that burden." I understood what he was saying beneath what he was saying. He wanted control of her money. "David, I don't think you should be involving yourself in Mom's finances. If she wants our input, she'll ask for it." She asked me to call you, actually. She wanted to know if you'd be interested in a joint account arrangement where we could all help manage her assets. That was a lie. I knew it was a lie in the same way you know when you've stepped on a piece of glass. The sharp, immediate certainty of pain. No, I said. Tell Mom I think that's a bad idea. I heard the smile in his voice when he responded. I will. I think she'll be disappointed, though. She's been really stressed about being alone with all this responsibility. When I called Mom that evening, she didn't answer. I tried again the next day, and the day after that. By June, I was texting her every 2 days. She'd respond with one-word answers. Fine. Okay. Yes. By July, even those responses stopped. And I had no idea what David had told her, what narrative he'd constructed, what evidence he'd supposedly accumulated to prove that I'd abandoned her, betrayed her, dismissed her. I was being erased from my own family story. The first sign of the actual theft came in a way I would never have expected. It was August. I was at a work event, a networking mixer for financial professionals. I was standing near the bar with my colleague Jennifer, who was talking about her investments, when a woman I didn't recognize approached us. Excuse me, she said. I hope I'm not intruding, but I overheard you say you're a financial analyst. Yes, I said. I work for Mitchell and Partners. The woman's face changed. A flicker of recognition crossed it. Mitchell, your last name is Mitchell. Yes, it is. Do you have a brother named David? The air around me suddenly felt different. I do. Why? I work at First National Bank downtown. I process business accounts. Your brother came in about a year ago and opened an account for his mother's estate planning purposes. He said you were aware of the arrangement and that you'd authorized him to handle her financial matters while she was struggling with depression and grief. I didn't move. I was looking at this woman's face, at her genuine confusion, at her attempt to be helpful, and I was trying to process what she'd just told me. What? My voice sounded strange to my own ears. He came in with paperwork, power of attorney documentation. He said the family had authorized him to take over management of your mother's accounts while she was dealing with her mental health issues. I didn't answer her immediately. I couldn't. My mind was running through scenarios, timelines, possibilities. Did you see the power of attorney document? I finally asked. It was in his file, yes. It looked legitimate, signed by your mother. After she walked away, I excused myself and went to the bathroom. I locked the door of a stall and sat on the closed toilet for 10 minutes, trying to breathe steadily. I didn't know if my mother had actually signed a power of attorney or if David had forged one. I didn't know how much money was involved. I didn't know what he'd told the bank or what documentation he'd presented. But I knew, with absolute certainty, that he was stealing from her. When I got home that evening, I told Marcus everything. We need to call her, he said immediately. We need to call her right now and ask her directly if she gave David power of attorney. And say what? That I was at a party and randomly encountered a bank employee. That will sound insane. Then what are you going to do? I didn't have an answer yet, but I knew I couldn't act on anger. Anger is what criminals exploit. Anger is clumsy and loud and easily dismissible. I needed to be strategic. The next morning, I called my mother. She picked up on the third ring. Hello. Hi, Mom. I was hoping we could grab lunch this weekend. There's something I've been wanting to talk to you about. There was a pause, a long one. Okay, Sunday. Sunday sounds perfect. There's a cafe you like on Maple Street, 1 o'clock. I'll be there. I hung up and felt something shift inside me. My hands were steady. My thinking was clear. The confusion and hurt I'd been carrying for months suddenly crystallized into something purposeful. The lunch was awkward at first. My mother looked thinner than I remembered. There were new lines around her eyes. She was wearing reading glasses on a chain, and she kept adjusting them nervously. We ordered food, made small talk about the weather, about her book club, about my work. Normal things, surface things. Then I set my fork down and looked at her directly. Mom, I need to ask you something, and I need you to really think about your answer." She met my eyes. "Okay. Did you give David power of attorney over your financial accounts?" Her face went still. I watched her carefully. She wasn't confused by the question. She wasn't surprised. She was calculating. "David said you were fine with it," she said finally. "He said you two had discussed it." That's when I knew for certain. She didn't know what David had done. She'd been told something by him, some version of events that made the power of attorney seem reasonable, maybe even good for the family. "We never discussed it. I would never be fine with David having control of your money." "Why not? He's your brother." "Exactly. He's your son. You're his mother. That's not a good relationship in which to give financial power." My mother's hands were shaking now. I could see her grip tightening on her water glass. "He said you were trying to control me, that you wanted me to think he was untrustworthy." "Has David asked to borrow money since he got the power of attorney?" "Not borrow. He's been helping me manage investments. He says he's trying to help me grow what I have so I'm secure in my retirement." "Has he given you statements, proof of what's happening with your accounts?" She didn't answer. "Mom, has he shown you account statements?" "He says everything is complicated right now with the market. That he'll show me a full report once things settle." I set my fork down carefully. "I want you to call the bank. Today, I want you to ask them to provide you with a complete statement of your account activity for the past year." "Sarah, I don't want to." "Mom, please, just do this. For me. Call the bank and get the statements, and then we can sit down together and go through them." She finally nodded, but I could see the fear in her face. She was beginning to understand that something was very wrong. The bank statements arrived 4 days later. I was waiting in my mother's living room when she came back from retrieving them from her mailbox. She looked like she'd been crying. She handed them to me without a word and sat down on the couch. I went through the statements page by page. The withdrawals started in March. Small ones at first, 2,000 here, 3,000 there, cash withdrawals mostly, or transfers to an account I didn't recognize. But as the months progressed, the amounts increased. By June, there was a withdrawal for $15,000 listed as estate consulting fees. By July, there was a transfer of $25,000 to something called Mitchell Properties Development LLC. By August, the pattern had accelerated. $30,000 chunks, $40,000 chunks. I found transfers totaling $180,000 over the course of 6 months. My mother was silent beside me, completely silent. "How did you not notice?" I asked. "I don't look at the statements," she whispered. "David said he would handle all of that. He said I didn't need to worry myself with the details anymore." I felt something dangerous move through me. Not anger, something colder, something focused. "How much is left?" she asked. I calculated. 232,000, maybe slightly more. She made a sound like a wounded animal. "Oh God." "We're going to fix this," I said, "but we're going to do it carefully, and we're going to do it right." That's when Sarah Mitchell disappeared. The woman who cried, who felt wronged, who wanted to immediately confront her brother and demand answers. She stopped existing. In her place was someone different, someone colder, someone who understood that the only way to win was to think like the person who'd hurt her. I drove home in silence that evening. I didn't call Marcus. I didn't call anyone. I arrived at our house, went straight to my office, and closed the door. I opened my laptop and created a new email address. No personal information, just a random Gmail account with a random name. Then I called the bank as a representative of my mother's estate law firm. I requested copies of all documentation related to the power of attorney. I requested complete transaction history for the past 2 years. I requested information about the account the withdrawals had been transferred to. The bank employee told me to have the request come through official channels. I contacted my mother's actual attorney, a woman named Patricia Chen who'd handled her will. I told Patricia everything. She listened without interrupting, then said 4 words that made me understand the path forward. This is wire fraud. Federal crime. That's what my brother had committed. It wasn't just theft. It was wire fraud because the transfers had crossed from a bank system into other accounts. It was also elder abuse because he'd exploited a vulnerable person, his elderly mother, to steal money. Patricia referred me to a forensic accountant named Robert Klein. Robert worked with law enforcement and private attorneys to trace stolen funds and build financial crime cases. I met with Robert on a Thursday afternoon in his office, which was filled with books and papers and the kind of organized chaos that comes from someone who understood numbers better than people. "How bad is it?" I asked. He looked at me over his glasses. "Do you have bank statements?" I handed him the folder. He spent 45 minutes going through them, making notes, occasionally writing down numbers on a legal pad. "This is sophisticated," he said finally. "Whoever did this knew what they were doing. They spaced out the withdrawals. They used different methods: cash, transfers, wire payments. They created a fake LLC to make some of the payments seem legitimate. If your mother hadn't requested the statements, this could have gone on for another 2 years easily." "Can you prove who made the transfers?" "I can try. I'll need more information. IP addresses from the online transfers, the details of the power of attorney document, the LLC registration records. But if your brother was stupid enough to use his own information or accounts, yes, I can prove it." Over the next 6 weeks, I moved through my daily life like an actress playing a role. I went to work. I attended meetings. I was pleasant and professional. I told no one at my office what was happening. I came home and made dinner. I watched television with my husband. I went to bed at a reasonable hour. But every evening, after Marcus fell asleep, I was awake on my laptop. I'd received a copy of the power of attorney from Patricia. It was signed by my mother. David had clearly gotten her to sign it, but she'd signed it in what appeared to be good faith, believing his story about helping with her finances. I traced the LLC registration to an address David used for a previous business venture. I obtained copies of David's bank statements through Discovery, working with Patricia's legal team. And there they were, the deposits. Thousands of dollars, matching the withdrawals from my mother's account, flowing into accounts that David controlled. I found credit card statements showing David using the money to pay for family vacations. A $6,000 trip to Disneyland, a $10,000 golf club membership, luxury car payments. He'd stolen our mother's retirement fund and used it to live a life he couldn't afford. Robert Klein prepared a forensic accounting report that was 32 pages long. It detailed every transaction, showed the timeline of the theft, proved that David was the only person with access to make these transfers, and quantified the exact amount stolen. $384,000. More than I'd initially thought. As I read through the report late one night, I felt something settle inside me. A certainty, a clarity. The evidence was overwhelming. He was going to lose. Building a case against your brother is not like I imagined it would be. I thought there would be more anger, more moments where my emotions would override my strategy. Instead, there was only focus. Patricia had advised me that we had 3 options. We could go to the police and file a criminal complaint. We could pursue a civil lawsuit, or we could do both simultaneously. Criminal prosecution will be slow, Patricia explained during one of our meetings in her office. The DA will need to evaluate whether there's enough evidence to proceed. If they decide to prosecute, it could take years to go to trial. Civil court will be faster, but the burden of proof is lower. I recommend we file the civil suit immediately and let the police process develop in parallel. Will filing the civil suit tip David off? I asked. Inevitably. Once we file, he'll be served with the lawsuit. He'll know he's being pursued. I'd already anticipated this. I'd spent weeks thinking about the moment when David would understand that I knew everything. I want to wait, I said. I want to gather more information first. What kind of information? I want to know if he's stolen from her before. I want to see if there's a pattern. I want his phone records, his email records, everything." Patricia raised her eyebrows. "That's going to require legal process. We can't just access those things. Even if it's to prove elder abuse." "Even then. But once we file the lawsuit, we can subpoena those records. He'll be required to produce them." So I waited. During this time, I did something that Marcus didn't know about. I hired a private investigator named Susan Hayes. Susan had worked in law enforcement for 20 years before becoming a PI. She was careful and thorough and didn't ask unnecessary questions. "What do you need?" Susan asked during our first meeting at a coffee shop near my office. "I need to know if my brother has done this before. I need his financial history for the past 10 years. I need to know if other family members have reported money missing. I need to understand the full scope of what he's capable of." Susan spent 4 weeks working the case. She spoke to banks, reviewed public records, talked to people who'd worked with David, examined property records. What she found was a man who'd been slowly building a reputation for financial irresponsibility since his late 20s. He'd defaulted on a small business loan in 2010. He'd had a second mortgage that was foreclosed on in 2013. There were 3 separate credit cards with charge-offs. He'd been sued by a contractor over a real estate development project that never materialized. And then, about 18 months before he targeted our mother, his credit had mysteriously cleaned up. The foreclosure was cleared, the debts were paid off, he'd suddenly become creditworthy again. "He paid everything off," Susan said, handing me a file. "All at once, using cash. No loans, no payment plans, just sudden liquidity." "Do you think?" "I think your brother may have done this before. I think your mother might not have been his first victim." I felt something cold crystallize in my chest. "Can you find out who else might have been targeted?" "I can try, but without them coming forward, it's going to be difficult." I decided to reach out. This was the riskiest move I made during the entire process. If David found out I was investigating him, if he realized the scope of what I was doing, he could try to disappear, to hide money, to destroy evidence. But I needed to know if I was the only person he'd manipulated this way. Through a family genealogy website, I found contact information for our paternal aunt, Linda. She'd always been distant from our family. I hadn't seen her in probably 15 years. I called her on a Tuesday afternoon. "Hi, Aunt Linda, it's Sarah Mitchell. I'm not sure if you remember me." "Sarah, of course I remember you. How are you? How's your mother?" My throat tightened at the question. "That's actually why I'm calling. Something's happened, and I'm trying to understand if there's a pattern to it. Can I ask you something confidential?" "Of course." "Has David ever asked you for money? Or has he ever had access to your finances?" There was a long pause. "Why do you ask that?" she finally said. "Because something's happened with my mother and David, and I'm trying to understand if this is something he's done before." "Your mother," Linda said quietly. "Oh, honey, how much did he take from her?" My hands were shaking. $384,000. I heard Linda take a sharp breath. "I should have warned her," Linda said. "I should have told your mother years ago." Aunt Linda had lent David $30,000 in 2008. She'd wanted to help him get his business started. She'd believed in him, and when she'd asked for the money back, he'd disappeared. He'd avoided her calls, changed his number, and made himself unavailable until she'd eventually given up. After 8 years, he'd suddenly called her and offered to pay her back. He'd sent a check for $30,000. She'd cashed it, and she'd never understood where the money had come from. "I think he stole it from someone else," I told her. "Oh my God," she whispered. I gave Linda Patricia's contact information. I told her about the case we were building. I asked if she would be willing to speak to the detective who would eventually be assigned to investigate. She said yes. By the time I hung up the phone, I had 4 weeks of detailed investigation complete. I had bank records, credit reports, property records, and witness testimony from a family member who could attest to David's pattern of financial deception. I had everything I needed. Now, I just had to wait for the right moment to deploy it. The call came on a Friday evening in late November. I was in my office at work when David texted me, "Can we talk, please?" It was the first direct communication I'd had with him in months. I almost didn't respond. But I needed him to believe I was vulnerable. I needed him to think there might be a way to negotiate his way out of what was coming. "Sure, when?" I texted back. "Tonight, can you meet me at the Riverside Bar on 5th? This is where I made a decision that changed the trajectory of everything. I told Marcus I had to work late. I drove to a security camera store and purchased a small recording device, a pen with an embedded microphone. It was the kind of thing that might not hold up in court, but that wasn't the point. The point was to hear what David had to say when he thought no one was listening. I arrived at the bar 20 minutes early. I chose a quiet booth in the back corner. I ordered a ginger ale and waited. David arrived at 7:15. He looked tired, worn down in a way I hadn't seen before. He was heavier than he'd been in the spring, his face bloated slightly. He was wearing a designer polo shirt, purchased with our mother's money, I'm certain of it. He sat across from me and didn't say anything for a long moment. "What do you want?" I asked. "I want to explain things." "Explain what?" "The situation with Mom, the money." I felt my pulse quicken, but I kept my face neutral. "Go on." He looked around the bar, checking to see if anyone was watching. Then he leaned forward, his elbows on the table. "I did take money from her account, but it wasn't stealing. She wanted to help me. I explained to her that I needed capital for a business venture, and she gave me permission to use the power of attorney to access the funds." "That's a lie," I said calmly. "It's not. I can prove it. I have emails from Mom saying she wanted to help me get my business off the ground." I'd seen David manipulate people too many times to believe he suddenly couldn't manipulate me. Those emails likely existed. He was smart enough to cover his tracks. But they'd be carefully worded, vague enough that a lawyer could argue he'd misinterpreted her consent. "Okay," I said. "So you had permission. But you also spent the money on personal expenses, not a business venture. You spent it on vacations and club memberships and things that had nothing to do with any investment." He flinched, just slightly, but he flinched. Those were business-related expenses that I can categorize differently." "David, stop." He stopped. "I'm going to be very clear about what's happening. I have a forensic accounting report that proves you transferred $384,000 from our mother's accounts to your own accounts. I have bank records showing you spent that money on personal expenses. I have evidence that you manipulated Mom into signing a power of attorney under false pretenses. And I have your credit history, which shows a clear pattern of financial irresponsibility." His face went white, completely white. "I'm filing a lawsuit against you on behalf of Mom," I continued. "She's also considering filing a police report. But before that happens, I want you to understand something. You didn't just steal money. You stole her dignity. You made her believe that her own daughter had abandoned her. You used that lie to justify taking everything she worked for her entire life." He stood up abruptly. "You don't understand." "Sit down," I said. He actually sat back down, just because I'd spoken with a voice that brooked no argument. "I understand that you're a liar and a thief. And the only reason I'm sitting here having this conversation, instead of letting the police surprise you with a warrant, is because I want you to have the opportunity to make this right." "Make it right how?" His voice was desperate now. "I don't have $384,000. Most of it's gone. I spent it." "That's too bad," I said, "because now you're going to experience the consequence of that choice." I stood up from the table. "You're going to be sued. You're going to be investigated. And if you're very lucky, you'll settle out of court and declare bankruptcy and spend the next decade rebuilding your life." He grabbed my arm as I walked past him. "Sarah, wait, please. I can get you some money, maybe half, I can." I pulled my arm free. I didn't speak. I just looked at him. At the man who'd tried to destroy me, who'd convinced my mother that I'd betrayed her, who'd thought he was so clever that he'd never get caught. And then I walked out of the bar, got in my car, and drove to my attorney's office, where Patricia was waiting for me. "Is he going to run?" Patricia asked. "Possibly, probably, he's panicked." "Then we file immediately, tomorrow morning. Once it's in the system, he can't hide." That night, I finally told Marcus everything. I told him about David, about the stolen money, about the investigation, about the recording device in the bar, about the forensic accountant and the detective and the private investigator. He listened to all of it in silence, and when I was done, he pulled me into his arms. "You've been carrying this alone," he said into my hair. "I needed to," I told him. "I needed to be careful. I needed to think like someone trying to win a game against someone who'd already shown they'd do anything to survive." "Well," he said, "you did win. He's going to lose everything." I wanted to believe that, but I also knew that David wouldn't go down without a fight. The lawsuit was filed on December 3rd. By noon, David had been served. Patricia had advised me that once the lawsuit was official, there was no taking it back. Discovery would begin. Depositions would be scheduled. The machinery of the legal system would start moving, slowly and inevitably, toward one of two outcomes. Either David would be forced to pay back the money with interest and legal fees, or the case would go to trial. I didn't want it to go to trial. I wanted him to understand the weight of what was coming and surrender. But David wasn't the surrendering type. Within a week, he'd hired an attorney. A shark named Gerald Morrison who defended financial crimes for 20 years. Gerald immediately filed a motion claiming that the power of attorney document was valid, that David had the legal right to access the funds, and that any spending he'd done was with implicit consent. But here's where the twist revealed itself in a way that even I didn't fully anticipate. The police investigation, which had been running parallel to the civil suit, uncovered something that Patricia hadn't expected to find. When Detective James Reeves subpoenaed David's email accounts, he found communications between David and a woman named Victoria Tran. Victoria worked at the bank where Mom's account was held. She was an assistant manager, someone with access to accounts and systems. The emails showed that David had been in an affair with Victoria for 2 years. The emails also showed that David had promised to give her money once he'd settled some family business. But the most damaging emails were the ones where David had explicitly asked Victoria for help accessing Mom's account, for help moving money without triggering fraud alerts, and for help creating fake documentation that would make the power of attorney seem legitimate. In other words, this wasn't just theft. This was a conspiracy. Gerald Morrison immediately filed a motion to sever Victoria from the lawsuit, arguing that her involvement was tangential and that David shouldn't be held responsible for her actions. Patricia argued the opposite, that David's co-conspiracy with a bank employee was evidence of premeditation and sophistication that made the crime more serious, not less. The judge sided with Patricia. But here's what happened next, something I genuinely did not see coming. Victoria, facing her own criminal charges and the loss of her job, decided to cooperate with the police. In exchange for a reduced sentence and immunity from some charges, she agreed to testify against David. She admitted to creating the false documentation. She admitted to helping David move money. She admitted that David had explicitly manipulated her by promising her money and telling her that the power of attorney was legitimate and that he had his mother's consent. She became the prosecution's star witness. The deposition happened in a small room in the courthouse on December 18th. Patricia, Gerald Morrison, David, Victoria, the court reporter, and me, sitting quietly in the back, observing. Victoria was pale and terrified. She'd lost her job. Her reputation was destroyed. She understood that cooperating was her only path forward, but it was costing her everything. Patricia began with simple questions. "Ms. Tran, did David Mitchell ask you to assist in accessing his mother's bank account?" "Yes." "Did he explain why he needed this assistance?" "He said his mother had asked him to manage her finances because she was dealing with depression and grief. He said the power of attorney was real, but that the bank's systems were making things difficult, and he needed help navigating them. Do you believe that was the truth? Victoria's eyes filled with tears. No, I don't. I think he lied to me. Why do you think he lied? Because the power of attorney he showed me was forged. I know what a legitimate document looks like, and this was not legitimate. But He was charming. He made me feel special. He told me his family didn't understand him, that his mother was difficult, that he needed someone to trust, and I wanted to believe him. When it was Gerald Morrison's turn to question her, he was aggressive. Ms. Tran, isn't it true that you initiated contact with David Mitchell, that you reached out to him first? I initiated professional contact related to his mother's account. He then became personally interested in me. And isn't it true that you became romantically involved with him, that you wanted a relationship with him? Yes, but... And isn't it true that David never made any explicit demands of you, that you volunteered to help him? I volunteered because he asked me to help, and I believed. You believed what you wanted to believe. You believed a man who paid attention to you, and that was your choice, wasn't it? Victoria's voice broke. Yes. So isn't it possible that you misunderstood his intentions, that you created a narrative of deception in your own mind? Patricia stood up. Objection, that's argumentative and not a question. The court reporter noted the objection. But the damage was done. Morrison had planted the idea that Victoria was unstable, emotional, potentially unreliable. He was fighting for his client's life. After the deposition, I caught Victoria in the hallway outside the courtroom. I'm sorry, I told her, about what Morrison said. She looked at me with hollow eyes. He's right, though. I did want to believe David, and maybe I did help him because I wanted to be special to someone, even if that someone was a liar. You did the right thing. In the end, you're helping the truth come out. The truth, she said bitterly. The truth is that I ruined my life for a man who never cared about me. She walked away, and I understood something I hadn't fully grasped before. David's crime wasn't just against my mother. It was against everyone he touched. The settlement conference happened on January 9th. Judge Patricia Morrison, no relation to the attorney, had ordered both sides to mediation before proceeding to trial. She wanted to give David an opportunity to settle, to save everyone involved from the lengthy trial process. The conference took place in Judge Morrison's chambers. Patricia, Gerald Morrison, David, myself, and the judge. David looked destroyed. His suit hung loosely on his body, as if he'd lost weight rapidly. He wasn't making eye contact with anyone. Judge Morrison explained the terms. The prosecutor's office had agreed to offer David the opportunity to resolve the criminal case with a felony conviction for wire fraud, with sentencing recommendations ranging from 5 to 8 years in prison, depending on his cooperation and remorse. In exchange, he could accept the criminal charges and avoid a trial, which would be lengthy and would keep him under public scrutiny. Or he could continue fighting, go to trial, and risk a harsher sentence if convicted. On the civil side, Patricia presented the judge with the forensic accounting report. She presented David's bank records. She presented the communications with Victoria. She presented everything we'd gathered over months of careful investigation. Your Honor, the defendant has stolen $384,000 from his elderly mother. He has depleted her retirement savings. He has manipulated her emotionally. He has created false documentation. He has conspired with a bank employee to commit fraud, and he has shown no remorse. Gerald Morrison stood up. Your Honor, my client was authorized by a legitimate power of attorney to access these funds. Any spending he did was in the context of his belief that his mother wanted to help him. The fact that he mismanaged the funds is a civil matter, not a criminal conspiracy. Judge Morrison looked unimpressed. Your Honor, Patricia continued, the defendant's misuse of funds isn't the core issue. The core issue is that the power of attorney was obtained fraudulently, that the defendant made false representations to his mother, and that he conspired with a bank employee to cover his tracks. This is not mismanagement. This is wire fraud and elder abuse. Judge Morrison asked David if he wanted to speak. He stood slowly. His voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry," he said. "I know that doesn't change anything, but I'm sorry." "You're sorry you got caught," the judge said. "You're not sorry you did it. You're not sorry you lied to your mother. You're not sorry you stole her retirement fund. You're sorry that you're now facing consequences." David didn't respond. Judge Morrison turned to Patricia. "On the civil side, I'm awarding full restitution to the plaintiff. The defendant will pay back $384,000 in stolen funds, plus interest calculated at 5% per annum, plus all legal fees associated with this case. That will bring the total obligation to approximately $452,000. I'm also awarding damages for elder abuse, which I'm setting at an additional $50,000. Total judgment, $502,000. My hands were shaking. My mother would get her money back. She would have her security restored. Furthermore, Judge Morrison continued, given the defendant's apparent lack of remorse, I'm recommending that the prosecutor seek the maximum sentence of 8 years in prison. This case demonstrates a pattern of calculated theft and manipulation that suggests the defendant poses an ongoing danger to vulnerable individuals. Gerald Morrison stood immediately to file an objection, but Judge Morrison waved him off. "I'm tired of listening to you minimize your client's culpability, Mr. Morrison. This man stole from his mother. He lied to her. He broke her trust. And then he tried to convince this court that somehow that's not his fault. I'm not interested in that narrative." We broke for a 10-minute recess, while Judge Morrison reviewed some documents. When we reconvened, she announced her final ruling. The defendant has 10 days to file an appeal regarding the civil judgment. However, that judgment is immediately enforceable. I'm issuing a court order that all of the defendant's accounts be frozen and that his income be subject to garnishment until the judgment is satisfied. Additionally, I'm recommending that the prosecutor pursue the criminal charges aggressively. Mr. Mitchell, you're free to go, but expect that you'll be hearing from law enforcement within the next week with formal charges. After we left the judge's chambers, my mother was waiting in the hallway. She'd asked to come to the conference. She'd wanted to be present for this moment. When she saw me, she cried. Not small tears. Great, heaving sobs that came from a place of relief, so profound it had rendered her temporarily unable to control her own emotions. I held her. We stood in the hallway of the courthouse, and I held my mother while she wept. "I'm so sorry," she kept saying. "I'm so sorry I didn't believe you." "You were manipulated," I told her, "by someone who knew exactly how to do it. That's not your fault." Patricia handed her copies of the judgment. My mother looked at the paper, at the numbers, at the documentation of her vindication. "I get the money back?" she asked. "You get the money back," Patricia confirmed. "The defendant will be ordered to make payments. If he doesn't, the court will pursue collection through other means, garnishing his wages, seizing assets, whatever is necessary." My mother looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not gratitude, something deeper. Recognition, maybe. The understanding that her daughter had fought for her in a way that most people never fight for anyone. 6 months later, I'm sitting in my mother's living room on a Sunday afternoon. David accepted a plea deal on charges of wire fraud and conspiracy. He's serving a 6-year sentence in a federal correctional facility upstate. He'll be eligible for parole in 4 years, but the prosecutor has indicated she'll oppose it. Victoria Tran took a plea deal as well. She received 3 years probation and community service. She's working at a grocery store now, trying to rebuild a life that David's manipulation destroyed. My mother's account has been restored. She received a settlement from David's assets, the house and some investment accounts that were seized as part of the judgment. It's not the full amount, but it's approximately $300,000, enough to reclaim her security. She's started traveling. She took a trip to Italy in April. She's planning another one to Greece in the fall. "I'm using the money to live," she told me, "the way I was supposed to all along." My relationship with my mother has changed. There's a depth to it now that didn't exist before. We don't have small conversations anymore. When we talk about real things. We talk about what it means to be hurt by someone you love. We talk about resilience. We talk about trust. Sometimes she'll look at me and I'll see understanding in her eyes. The understanding that I made a choice to be methodical rather than emotional, to gather evidence rather than confront, to trust the system rather than take justice into my own hands. I chose the hard path, the slow path, the path that required patience and strategy and the ability to suppress my own anger for 18 months while I built a case. And it worked. That's the thing nobody tells you about revenge. The best revenge isn't loud. It's not dramatic. It's not about making your enemy suffer in some public, visible way. The best revenge is simply winning. It's about being smarter than the person who tried to destroy you. It's about understanding systems and using them. It's about gathering evidence instead of throwing accusations. It's about being so patient and so strategic that by the time your enemy realizes what's happening, it's already over. David thought he was playing a game against an emotional, hurt woman who'd been isolated from her own mother. He had no idea he was playing against someone who decided to think like a hunter. I still have the forensic accounting report on my laptop. I sometimes open it late at night and read through it, not because I need to, but because it's a document that represents the moment I stopped being a victim and became someone who took her power back. My mother asked me, not long ago, if I felt vindicated. I told her the truth. I feel resolved. There's a difference between vindication and resolution. Vindication is about what other people acknowledge. Vindication is external. It depends on someone else recognizing that you were right. Resolution is about what you know internally. It's about understanding that you did what was necessary, that you did it well, and that you can move forward without the weight of unanswered questions and stolen dignity. I have that now. David has a number instead of a name. He wakes up in a cell every morning, and he understands, with a clarity that no amount of denial can obscure, that he created this situation himself. My mother has her life back, and I have something better than revenge. I have my mother's trust restored. I have the knowledge that I was strong enough to wait, smart enough to plan, and capable enough to execute a strategy that took down someone who thought they were invulnerable. I have the understanding that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stop fighting and start building a case. And I have the peace of knowing that justice, when it finally arrives, tastes like victory.